In Jean-Paul Sartre's novel, The Age of Reason, the hero, Matthew, a professor of philosophy, proclaims Sartre's philosophy of human freedom. And he says, he was free, free for everything, free to act like an animal or like a machine. He could do what he wanted to do. Nobody had the right to advise him. He was alone in a monstrous silence, free and alone, without an excuse, condemned to decide without an excuse, condemned to decide without any possible recourse, condemned forever to be free. Sartre is famous for the idea that we are condemned to be free. This is an idea which runs through all his writing. What do these frightening words mean? The meaning is made clear in Sartre's great philosophical essay of 1943, Being and Nothingness, which was written during the bitter years of World War II in France. After the Germans, with little opposition, had seized Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, the great Western powers finally entered the picture, and World War II erupted in 1939. Sartre was drafted, and when the French army surrendered to the Germans in 1940, Sartre became a prisoner of war for 9 months. Cleverly, he arranged to be released for reasons of health, and he returned to teaching philosophy in a France which was now occupied by the German army. The experience of France under German rule from 1940 to 1944 transformed Sartre into a political being. He became active in the French resistance movement. He did reporting for an underground newspaper, and he wrote and produced powerful anti-Nazi plays. These years of the German occupation of France were to be the most astonishingly productive of Sartre's life. His major intellectual production during that period was the massive 724-page essay, Being and Nothingness. Sartre had begun to write this systematic statement of his philosophic viewpoint during the gloomy winter of 1942 in occupied France. Like most of the work of Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, much of it was written in the cafes of the left bank of the River Seine in Paris, in the cafe atmosphere, filled with the sounds of voices and the clinking of silverware and dishes, the smells of coffee, liquor, cigarettes, and food, and the sights of the customers entering, leaving, and circulating among their friends seated at the brightly lighted tables. Sartre was a regular at the cafe called the Dome, later at the Café de Flore, both of them on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, a street similar to 8th Street in New York's Greenwich Village. Sartre has occasionally been accused of being a café philosopher, suggesting that his writing is not serious scholarship, or that it is only a mirror for the passing human scene, for the fascinating but frivolous flux of the café, rather than being concerned with the serious realm of truth. But in defense of Sartre, it is only fair to say that many things recommended the café as a place to write at that time. First, and of immediate importance, the cafés were heated, unlike the bitter cold of the tiny, ugly left bank hotel rooms in which Sartre lived during the war years. Moreover, the cafés of the great European cities have traditionally been places of intellectual stimulation, gathering places for artists, intellectuals, radicals of the left and right, but especially for Sartre, who is seeking, like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche before him, to develop a philosophy of human existence which will provide moral guidance for human beings. The life of the café is a continual bubbling source of the concrete human existence which he wishes to capture. What then does the massive, difficult philosophical treatise, Being and Nothingness, this café product of the harsh years of the German occupation of France, have to tell us about the human condition? In the introduction to Being and Nothingness, Sartre calls the first part the pursuit of being. Sartre wants to follow Descartes in making my consciousness the starting point of philosophy. He wants to follow Descartes' fundamental viewpoint of subjectivism, the view that what I can know with certainty is only my own consciousness and its ideas. But Sartre finds it necessary to revise Descartes. I am conscious of thinking, says Sartre, but there is no basis for Descartes' claim that this proves my existence as a substance whose essence it is to think. I have no substantial continuing self which I can know, says Sartre. Nobody lives there anymore, as Roquentin said. Secondly, in opposition to Descartes, Sartre agrees with the philosopher Husserl's view of consciousness as intentional, as intending or referring to an object. Consciousness is always of an object, says Sartre. Consciousness points to what is other than itself, to things which are outside it and stand over against my consciousness and confront my consciousness, as the ugly root of the chestnut tree confronted Roquentin's consciousness. In itself, says Sartre, consciousness is empty, nothing. It is a nothingness. It exists only as consciousness of some object. I am aware of an object and of the fact that I am aware. Now Sartre has laid the foundation for his philosophy. There are two absolutely separate kinds of beings, two regions of being, as he says. There is the being of myself as conscious being, and the being of that which is other than myself, separate from myself, the objects of which I am conscious. My conscious being, Sartre now calls being for itself. To be a conscious being for Sartre is to be a being for itself, by which he means a being which is conscious of itself and of objects. But there is the opposing kind of being, being in itself, the being of the objects of consciousness, the being of existing things, an apple, a stone, a chestnut tree. Things are causally determined to be what they are. They have no freedom, they have no consciousness, and they simply exist solidly as what they are, like the root of the chestnut tree. Sartre will now call this region of being, being in itself. We move on now with Sartre from the introduction to part one of Being and Nothingness, entitled The Problem of Nothingness. To be a human being, Sartre has told us so far, is to be this concrete conscious being, this being for itself, confronting a kind of being which it is not, the realm of objects, of things, of being in itself. To be a human being is to be in the world and to be aware of not being the objects of the world, to be aware of a gap between my conscious being and the objects of the world, to be aware of an emptiness, a nothingness that separates me from the world of objects. Sartre will now try to argue that to be a conscious being, to be a being for itself, is to be characterized by endlessly bringing nothingness into the world of being. What is Sartre up to? What does he mean by saying that to be conscious, to be a conscious human being, is to bring nothingness into the world? Sartre is trying to show you that conscious being is totally different from, separate from, outside of the causal deterministic order of things. In the causal deterministic order of things, all things are what they are, causally determined to be. They exist as they are, without any freedom, without consciousness, without awareness of gaps, without raising any questions, without being aware of any lacks or any possibilities, without any questions or doubts. Sartre is trying to make you see that conscious being is the only kind of being which has the power to separate itself by a gap from the solid causal world of objects, by being aware that it is not an object. It is also only because you are a conscious being that you can think of what you lack, do not have. What are your possibilities which are not now actual? Only as a conscious being can you be unsatisfied with yourself and desire not to be what you now are and desire to be what you are not. In all of these capacities on your part, your awareness that your consciousness is not the objects of which it is conscious. Your awareness of lacks, of possibilities, of unsatisfied desires. In all of these ways, you have been conscious of what is not the case, of what is not present, of what is not actual. You have been conscious of negating what is not, says Sartre. And so, says Sartre, you have brought negation, nothingness, into the world. This is what Sartre means by saying that nothingness enters the world with conscious beings, with concrete human existence. Another example of nothingness entering the world, another example of conscious being bringing nothingness into the world, is that conscious beings raise questions. Sartre says the human capacity to ask questions brings nothingness into the world. To take the attitude of a questioner, to ask, "Where is Pierre in the cafe?" is to open up the possibility of his not being there. It is again to introduce the notion of what is not the case, the notion of negation or nothingness. Here is Sartre's famous example of someone entering a cafe and looking for his friend Pierre, who is not there. And Sartre says in Being and Nothingness, it is certain that the cafe has being. It is certain that the cafe in itself, with its customers, tables, seats, mirrors, and lights, and its smoky atmosphere filled with the clatter of cups and saucers, the sound of voices and feet, it is a thing full of being. It is being in itself. But when this man asks the question, "Where is Pierre?" and he fails to see Pierre, the being of the cafe dissolves, becomes a nothing. The cafe is reduced to a mere background for the face of Pierre that he is looking for. The being of the cafe is made into nothing. It is negated, annihilated by the question, "Where is Pierre?" Moreover, in asking any question about the world, says Sartre, the questioner is detaching himself, separating himself, dissociating himself from the causal series of nature, the world of things, the world of being in itself. Only conscious beings like us have this capacity to question, and so to withdraw from the bare existence of things in the causal order. Only conscious beings like us have the capacity not to be part of the world of things, and to introduce a gap, a nothingness, between our consciousness and the world of things. And so Sartre is able to make his dramatic conclusion that it is through man that nothingness comes into the world of being. He says, man presents himself as a being who causes nothingness to arise in the world. And again, Sartre says, man secretes his own nothingness. Suddenly, however, Sartre shows you that the nothingness, the negation which human beings bring into the world, is at the same time human freedom. Suddenly I begin to discover what it means to be a human being. It is to be free from the causally determined world of things, and it is to be free to negate, to say no, to question, to imagine possibilities which are not present, to reduce to nothingness, to negate and annihilate the region of things, of being in itself, by my questions. As the cafe dissolves into nothingness by the question, "Where is Pierre?" And I suddenly become aware that my freedom as conscious being, as being for itself, is my power. As conscious being, I have the power of negation, the identical power of Hegel's principle of negation, the power to negate, annihilate, and annihilate, to break up and destroy. Sartre wants to show you that just as Hegel's principle of negation negates, annihilates, cancels, breaks up every stage of the dialectical process, so as a conscious being, I have the freedom and the power to negate, to separate myself from, to question, deny any object of my consciousness. Freedom is the most important aspect of conscious being, the freedom from the causally determined world of things and the power of negation. Through my freedom as conscious being, I am aware that I am not any of the objects before my consciousness. I question, I deny, I think of what is absent, of what is not the case, of what my future job possibilities are, which do not exist at present. I think of how I would like to change my personality or my appearance to be other than what they are now. I think of a future greatness for the United States, which it lacks at the present time. Sartre's point is that to be a conscious being is to be free and to have the power of negation. Freedom sets conscious being for itself, over against being in itself, the world of things. But now, dramatically, Sartre says that my freedom as a conscious being enters my own existence. As a conscious being, I am totally free and undetermined. Since I am totally free, my past does not determine what I am now. Between myself as I am now and my past, I have put a gap in nothingness. I am free from my past. Take the case of a gambler, says Sartre, a gambler who has resolved that he will gamble no more. When he is confronted with the gaming tables today, his past resolution does not determine what he does now. He finds that he is totally free. He is not determined by his past resolution. This new situation requires that he make a new choice, a choice that is totally free and wholly unpredictable, since conscious beings are totally free. We may add other examples to Sartre's example of the gambler. Doesn't every alcoholic, every compulsive eater, everyone addicted to cigarettes or drugs recognize the truth of Sartre's point that conscious beings are totally free? Every time I am confronted by whatever my temptation, I discover that I am free, that yesterday's resolution does not determine what I do now, that now I must choose again. Will I or will I not stick to my resolution not to drink or smoke or overeat? This is the freedom of conscious being which we all painfully discover. Just as my past does not determine what I am now, so what I am now does not determine my future. Suppose I choose, from among the possibilities that I have, to become a writer. Since I am totally free, my future actions are not determined by this present choice to become a writer. What I will actually do at a future moment when I am uncertain about my writing career will be a totally free action on my part, a new choice, and wholly unpredictable. Every writer who has ever suffered from writer's block and faced the choice of continuing to struggle or giving it all up is painfully aware of this. And so I begin to understand what it is to be totally free. Against Freud, Sartre argues that I am not causally determined by antecedent psychological conditions of my life. Against Marx, Sartre argues that I am not determined by the mode of production and class conflict of my society. I am totally free. But do not the sciences of the 20th century tell me that I am totally determined, not totally free? Do they not tell me that I am the inevitable, necessary product of an overwhelming set of conditions, that I am totally determined by biological, social, economic, historical, and psychological conditions? Then these conditions which determine me, are they not responsible for what I am or do? Sartre savagely denounces Marx, Freud, and the sciences for viewing human beings as if they were causally determined things within the region of being in itself, rather than viewing them as free, conscious beings. The facts of my life, says Sartre, may be biologically, psychologically, socially, and economically determined, but as conscious being, I choose the meaning they have for me. I live in a world of my own making, by the meaning I choose to give the facts of my life, and by the projects I choose for myself. And so I cannot say, my conditioning is responsible for what I do, but for my conditioning I would be so-and-so. My conditioning, says Sartre, is only the region of things, the region of being in itself, the world of facts, over against which I stand as a free conscious being, choosing the meaning I will give them. A man is always free, says Sartre, during the German occupation of France. He is always free to be a traitor or not. In the fiercest opposition to the view that the facts of the world make a man an alcoholic or a drug addict, Sartre argues that an alcoholic lives in a world of his own making by the meaning he has chosen to give his life and by choosing to live it as an alcoholic. Are you an addict of alcohol or food or drugs or tobacco? Sartre says you have chosen this and that you are free to choose another way to live your life. Nothing in your past prevents you. You are not determined by your past. But now Sartre shows us that there is even a greater depth to my freedom as conscious being. As a totally free conscious being, I discover that I alone give meaning to my world. I alone am responsible for the meaning of the world in which I live. The region of fact has only the meaning that conscious beings like me give it. But there is no absolute truth to which I can any longer turn to provide meaning for my life. I have no essence to guide me, and God is dead, says Sartre, along with Nietzsche, and there is no substitute independent realm of truth. No such independent realm of truth is to be found in science or in philosophy. And I see that I alone, says Sartre, give the world its meaning. I alone am the source of whatever meaning, whatever truth or value the world has. I alone absurdly am responsible for giving meaning to the world without having any essence or human nature, without God or any objective truth or value to support me. Everything that might be a foundation for me has collapsed. The existence of God, the universal truths of philosophy, the old beliefs in eternal values. And now I have the shattering awareness that by being totally free, I am totally responsible for my choices, totally responsible for what I am and do, totally responsible even for giving meaning and value to the world, and without any support from God or any absolute truth or value. And I totter on the brink of nothingness. I experience dizziness, vertigo, and anguish. Anguish is the recognition of my total freedom. Anguish is the realization that my total freedom is also my total responsibility to choose what I am and do, and to choose the very meaning of the world. What has Sartre done? He has flung me from freedom to anguish. He has flung me from hope to despair. I am indeed free, says Sartre, but my freedom is a dreadful freedom. I alone choose and am responsible for everything I am, I do, or I think. But I did not choose to be free. As conscious being, I am condemned to be free. But we try to escape this dreadful freedom. We try to avoid the anxiety which we experience when we are face to face with our own freedom. I long not to be condemned to freedom. I long not to have to live as an empty, isolated, frustrated, dissatisfied self, questioning and negating in my endless, dreadful freedom. I would wish to be simply a thing, a being in itself, like a stone or a glass. A stone, like all things, all being in itself, says Sartre, is massive and solid and glued to itself. Things have no gaps. They do not bring nothingness into the world. They do not feel lack. They do not feel dissatisfaction. They do not endlessly pursue possibilities and new projects. They do not freely choose and then bear the responsibility for their choice. But to try this, to seek to be a thing, to seek to escape from my freedom and responsibility, Sartre calls bad faith. Bad faith is the attempt to escape from my freedom by pretending to be a thing. We flee from anguish, says Sartre bitingly, by pretending to look at ourselves as a thing. But bad faith is self-deception. It is a lie we tell to ourselves. It is a lie in the soul, says Sartre. We are not things. We are totally free, conscious beings. But endlessly we escape from this painful truth about ourselves by the many forms of bad faith. Sartre now presents his famous examples of bad faith. Take the case of the courtship, says Sartre, a girl and a man on their first date, perhaps in a theater. The girl knows very well the intentions of the man, and she also knows, says Sartre, that sooner or later she will have to make a decision. But when she feels him take her hand, she postpones the decision of whether or not to accept him, and so she pretends that she has not noticed that he has taken her hand. Her hand has become a thing, resting passively in the warm hand of the man beside her. But she is in bad faith, Sartre points out. She is pretending that she is a thing and not a conscious free being, and that she is not responsible for what is going on. But of course, she is responsible. Or take the case of the waiter in the cafe, says Sartre. His movements are a little too precise, too rapid. He bends forward a little too eagerly, a little too solicitous for the customer's order. He has escaped from his freedom as a conscious being into acting a part, playing a social role, as if his essence is to be this perfect mechanism, the perfect waiter. But he is in bad faith. His essence is not to be a perfect waiter. He has no essence. He has consciously chosen to be a waiter. But he has escaped from his freedom as a person into becoming a mechanism in which he will gain social approval and avoid having to feel anything. Or take the case of the homosexual, says Sartre. The homosexual who says, "I am a homosexual," as if this were something that is his destiny, as if this were something that is involuntary on his part, that it is something which he cannot help, any more than a table can help being a table, or a red-haired man can help being red-haired. This homosexual, too, is in bad faith, says Sartre. He is trying to escape from his freedom and his responsibility as a conscious being for choosing what he is and what he does, by thinking of himself as a thing, conditioned by his past and fated by his past to be a homosexual. These are Sartre's famous examples of bad faith. But the question that will haunt Being and Nothingness from this point on is whether good faith is at all possible for conscious beings. What is good faith? This is the problem of ethics, of moral philosophy. We shall turn to Sartre's ethics next time.
Pre-recorded in the studios of the Maryland Center for Public Broadcasting.